Incredible reunion. Heartwarming moment reveals cop's hidden connection to mocked black veteran. The annual festival in Maplewood was always a sight to behold. Colorful booths lined the streets, filled with homemade pies, crafts, and laughter echoing through the warm summer air. But this year was different. An uneasy tension gripped the town as townsfolk congregated, whispering more than they were celebrating. Casey Ashworth felt the shift as she held tightly to her spirited daughter, Mia, navigating through the crowd. "All right, Mia, remember stay close," Casey urged, glancing around. Mia, with her wild curls and fearless laughter, nodded, but Casey could sense the weight on her shoulders. At 38, balancing two jobs was no easy feat, yet every day was about teaching Mia the values of hard work, resilience, and compassion. In the center of the square stood Harold, the town's retired black veteran, his face a mix of dignity and unspoken sorrow. Once hailed as a hero, his past valor had faded under the shadows of ridicule and prejudice, and that day, he became the target of a cruel joke from a group of locals. They snickered, their laughter sharp and mocking, while Casey's heart clenched. "Mom, we can't just stand here," Mia said, her cheeks flushed. Without a second thought, Casey stepped forward, feeling a fire ignite within her. "Enough," she shouted, her voice ringing out over the chatter. The crowd fell silent, turning to her, their expressions a blend of surprise and judgment. "Mia, this man is a war hero. Show some respect," Casey continued, fierce determination pushing her forward. The whispering chorus only grew as some looked away in shame, while others exchanged doubtful glances. Mia watched, wide-eyed, and Casey felt the weight of her daughter's gaze. This was not just a stand for Harold. It was a lesson in standing up for what was right. As the festival continued, vibrant music erupted around them. Casey, feeling both proud and unsettled, turned to detailed memories about Harold's service. "He fought for us, for our freedom," she said, her voice steady yet passionate. Little did she know, life was about to intertwine their stories in unexpected ways. Everything changed when she recalled an old photograph, one that revealed her late father as not just a cop, but a comrade of Harold during the war. The realization hit hard, blending personal history with community truths. As Casey shared this information, a murmur rippled through the crowd, stirring something deep within them. Before we continue, I need to let you know about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, hit that bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can drop a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As Casey turned to Harold, she saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. He was a man who had once fought against enemy lines, yet this divide felt like a crossfire he couldn't escape. The crowd had shifted, the air charged with potential, and Casey felt a wave of urgency overcoming her. If only they could come together. What would it take for the community to acknowledge their shared past? With her hand resting on Harold's shoulder, she looked him squarely in the eye, urging him to take a leap of faith. "Tell us your story, Harold, and let us start healing," she said, feeling the pulse of anticipation around them. Silence enveloped them, thick with a potent mixture of fear and hope. Would they listen? Would they step beyond their prejudices? As the eyes of the townsfolk turned toward Harold, the air hung heavy, and an unfinished question lingered. What transformation awaited for them all? The moment stretched, the silence palpable. Casey could practically feel the weight of expectation pressing down on them. She looked at Harold, his expression guarded yet searching. She had no idea how deeply his story was buried under layers of pain and pride. "Harold," she said softly, almost as if coaxing a fragile secret from a child. "It's time." With a sigh that seemed to echo a lifetime of stories, Harold began. "When I served, I wasn't just a soldier. I was part of a brotherhood," he said, his voice steady but low. "We went through hell together, fought side by side. But when we came home," his gaze drifted, staring into the distance, as memories washed over him. The crowd leaned in, caught by the gravity of his words. Mia tugged on Casey's sleeve, her eyes wide in curiosity, her little fingers gripping tightly. Casey squeezed back gently, keeping her daughter close, aware of the historical weight in the air, as if they all stood on sacred ground. They called us heroes during the war, Harold continued, but when we came back, it was different. I faced scorn instead of gratitude. It hurt more than any bullet ever could. His hands trembled slightly as he gestured to the people around him. But it wasn't just anger. It was deep, long-lasting sadness. Casey felt tears forming in her eyes. It was more than just a story. It was the real, raw truth of a man who had given everything, only to be forgotten. She looked at the crowd, each face etched with a mixture of guilt and empathy. Perhaps they, too, were beginning to understand the weight of their own actions. And then, Harold continued, the flicker of hope shining brighter now. I found strength in the community I served. There were some, like your father, Casey, who never stopped fighting for what was right. Her heart raced. The connection resonated deeper, intertwining their family stories, ripples of the past crashing into the present. I remember how we'd huddle together to talk about our dreams after the war. We were going to change things. His voice grew stronger, igniting a bit of spirit with the passion of those memories. But somehow, we were stuck in a cycle of division. Trust was lost. But it doesn't have to be that way, Casey interjected. Look around. We can change this. Her voice echoed in the charged air, spurring others into motion. A woman in the crowd stepped forward, her face filled with determination. Then we start by listening. Harold, you're not alone. We need your voice. A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Casey felt a spark igniting. This was the beginning of something profound, a collective decision to confront their history rather than hide from it. As Harold looked around at the faces now filled with sincerity, they gleamed with understanding, something she hadn't seen before. I never thought I'd see this day, he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. But everyone heard it, each one absorbing the meaning behind his words. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from a nearby booth, sending a ripple of startled gasps through the crowd. A pie stand had tipped, sending blueberry filling everywhere. The sound broke the solemn atmosphere, pulling everyone back from the brink where emotions ran high. Mia giggled, and Casey chuckled, relieved at the release of tension. Then, she looked up to see Harold smiling softly, a hint of joy creeping into his features. The beauty of their gathering, the moments of vulnerability, were all but woven together with this sudden diversion. Looks like we could all use a little sweetness after today, Casey said with relief, trying to lighten the mood. But as she glanced back at Harold, she remembered their mission. They had only just begun. What now? Someone called from the back. The enthusiasm hanging in the air, she realized how fragile their newfound bond was. With an unyielding determination, Casey replied, we hold on to this moment. Let us create more. Let us work together as a community. But deep down, Casey wondered, could they? Would the energy of this day carry forward into tangible change? And as everyone turned their eyes towards Harold once more, with hope in their hearts, a new storm was brewing on the horizon. What hidden truths would emerge next? What challenges lay ahead for the town of Maplewood as they sought healing? The laughter that erupted from the crowd was infectious, the tension of the previous moments melting away like ice beneath the sun. Harold chuckled softly as he wiped a bit of blueberry filling from his shirt, a sign that perhaps even the weight of his past could lighten, if only for a moment. Casey watched as people began to converge around the mess. The laughter turned into shared stories about similar mishaps at potlucks and community events. It felt good, so good, to see that glimmer of unity. Mia scrambled to help pick up stray bits of crust, innocent and hopeful. As the crowd buzzed with chatter, Casey noticed Harold standing a little apart, his gaze still distant, as if he were caught between two worlds, his past and this moment. She walked over, feeling the need to bridge the gap. Hey, she said softly, her voice cutting through the noise. Are you okay? He turned to her, the remnants of a smile still playing on his lips. I didn't expect this kind of reception, he admitted, glancing around at the tightened bonds forming in the crowd. It's been so long since I felt this. He paused, his voice faltering. Wanted? Casey felt a lump in her throat. What do you want? She asked, sincere in her curiosity, the atmosphere shifting into something more intimate. Harold looked into her eyes, searching. I want people to remember. Not just me, but the others, the ones who served and lost so much. I don't know how to get them to listen, to understand. You already started, Harold, she replied. You have a voice. They want to listen. We need to keep it going. A thrill ran through her. Could they really change the narrative? Just then, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd. Officer Matthews, her father's old partner, stepped forward. His face was solemn, yet there was a kindness about him that filled the air with possibility. "Harold," he called out, his voice projecting over the murmurs. "Can we talk?" The crowd quieted, the weight of history pressing once more, but this time it felt different. A chance for connection hung in the air. Casey felt a tug in her gut. There was a history here she didn't understand. The two men faced each other, and time stood still. Harold's eyes narrowed, a flicker of uncertainty darting across his face. "Of course," Harold replied cautiously. "But what do you have to say, Matthews?" Officer Matthews looked around, sensing the eagerness of the crowd, and then back at Harold. "I'm sorry for how things turned out. For my part in it. We could have done better back then." A ripple of whispers surged through the onlookers, empathy brewing as old wounds started to surface. Casey watched, heart pounding, aware that sometimes healing necessitated revisiting pain. Yet the hesitation in Harold's stance spoke volumes. "What changed?" Harold asked, crossing his arms. "It wasn't just the war." Matthews hesitated, searching for his words. "It was the silence after. We sheltered ourselves from what you and others were experiencing. It was wrong of us." Casey felt the emotion swelling within her, the urgency of the moment thickening around them. Would this confession bridge a gap or deepen an already sprawling chasm? "Hoping this is a step towards something better, we have to be honest, right?" Matthews continued, growing firmer in his conviction. "Whether we like it or not, we all have a role to play in this." Harold's expression softened, the weight of their shared history seeping through. "If you're serious about this, then we need more than words," he replied, his voice resonant with newfound strength. "Yes," Casey interjected, excitement igniting in her chest. "That's what we need. A plan, a movement, something that keeps this conversation going." Hands gripped shoulders, murmurs of agreement floated through the crowd, fueled by the emotions swirling between them, and a flicker of hope ignited. But just as it felt like they were on the brink of something monumental, a darker undercurrent crept into the atmosphere. What about the others who had been silent for too long? How could they join this newfound resolve? As Casey glanced at the people gathered around, questions swirled like autumn leaves in the wind. Would they all be brave enough? Could this small town truly confront its complexities and contradictions? The air thickened with anticipation. What would they uncover next? What truths lay ahead in their quest for healing? Officer Matthews cleared his throat, the weight of the moment pressing against him. He shifted uncomfortably, looking out at the crowd that had transformed from mere attendees to participants in something greater. This was not just about Harold anymore. It was about everyone with a story buried beneath layers of ache and unspoken truths. "Sometimes it's easier to close our eyes and pretend things don't exist," Matthews finally said, his voice steadying. "But that doesn't erase the hurt. And it doesn't help anyone heal." Harold took a breath, processing the vulnerability pouring out from Matthews. "You're right," he said quietly. "But it's not enough to just say sorry. People need to be held accountable, and the truth has to be laid bare." In that moment, Casey felt the stirrings of a powerful movement. She looked at the onlookers, each face reflecting the tension and spark of possibility. Would they stand with Harold and Matthews? "Maybe we hold a forum?" Casey suggested impulsively. "A place where everyone can share and listen. Where the stories of the past won't just dissolve into the air like they always do. We need to hear from everyone, not just the ones who can speak easily." Harold's eyes lit up, a flicker of hope illuminating his solemn expression. "Yes, we can create a space, a safe one. But it has to be real, no sugarcoating. If we just dance around the issues, nothing will change." The crowd began to murmur with a new vibration. Some nodded while others exchanged glances, unsure yet intrigued. Officer Matthews interjected, "And we need to make sure everyone feels invited. We can't let stigma hold anyone back from sharing their story. That means engaging folks who feel left out. It also means confronting our own pain." As the words hung in the air, Casey felt the weight of her own family's history. Would her father and the others who carried burdens return to this conversation? Would they even want to? You're right," Casey murmured, glanced back toward the crowd. "Every voice matters." A woman stepped forward from the back, a look of determination on her face. I lost someone too. My brother. He came home changed, and none of us knew how to talk to him. I still don't know how to confront our past or what happened to him, but I'm tired of pretending. The crowd erupted with exclamations of agreement. Casey felt goosebumps rush across her arms. This was the breakthrough they craved. Can we create a safe space where stories like yours are heard? Matthews asked, his eyes gleaming with sincerity. We want to start the process of healing. This community can't forget. In that instant, Casey believed they were onto something profound. If Matthew's words could coax others out of the shadows, why couldn't they seek out those who had been quiet for too long? What if they could shine a light into the dark corners of their town? Let us set a date. We can meet regularly, she said, her voice gaining strength. Imagine a community united, where every voice combines in a symphony of healing. And just as they began to discuss details, a church bell echoed in the distance, cutting through the evening light. It felt like a calling. Casey glanced at Harold, who bore emotions swirling in his eyes, a mixture of hope, trepidation, and a sense of justice. But as enthusiasm swelled, an uncomfortable question lingered. Which stories would be elevated, and who might still be left behind? Would everyone find their way to this new gathering? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting orange and purple shades on the sky, Casey sensed a change. They were pulling together, yet shadows loomed, waiting to disrupt. Would they truly be able to confront the truths that tied them to their past? Something inside her stirred an urgency she couldn't shake. How far were they willing to go? What awaited them in that first gathering? Would conversations ignite change, or simply reopen old wounds? The night fell gently, wrapping the gathering in a twilight embrace. The last remnants of sunlight flickered out, leaving the crowd aglow with the warm shimmer of street lamps and hesitant smiles. A mix of excitement and apprehension hung in the air like the familiar scent of rain on dry pavement. As Casey looked around, she felt the electric pulse of hope, threaded with uncertainty. The time for action was finally here. We'll have to reach everyone in town, she encouraged, her voice gaining a fervent edge. Everyone deserves to share their story, even those who are afraid or feel alone. But what about those who want to show up? Harold asked, his furrowed brow revealing his worry. What if they're the ones with the biggest stories? The ones with voices silenced? Officer Matthews took a step closer, his presence lending weight to the moment. That's why it's crucial to spread the word. We've got to go door to door if we have to. It won't be easy, but we can't leave anyone behind. A ripple of determination spread through the crowd. Some pulled out their phones, fingers dancing across screens to start a social media campaign. Others began making lists, names and faces of those in town who might need this moment to breathe, to heal, to speak. Then a tall man with weathered hands rose from the back. He was older, his face marked by years of struggle and resilience. What if we bring in people from the outskirts? Folks who feel they don't belong? We can hold this at the community center, but we need to reach beyond these walls. People are suffering alone. A murmur of agreement swept through, voices mingling, each carrying pieces of shared pain transformed into collective resolve. As they deliberated, Casey's heart raced. They were building something real, weaving threads of connection that spanned the town's history. But she also felt the worry lurking beneath the surface. Would everyone truly feel safe enough to share their truth? Would they all listen with open hearts? Let us make a plan, Casey declared, her voice firm. We need to decide what we want to achieve in our first meeting. Maybe we can start with a circle. Everyone just sits and takes turns speaking. No interruptions. Just listening. As the plan took shape, an unexpected noise broke the intensity of their conversation. A voice rang out from the back. Excuse me. It was a young woman, her hands shaking slightly as she stepped forward. I want to share something important. My uncle was a veteran. He would come after the war, and we never understood the wounds he carried. He took so long to talk, and when he did it was so hard to hear. But his story matters, as do all stories like his. The weight of her vulnerability settled like a heavy blanket over the crowd. Faces turned, reflecting compassion and empathy, the importance of each person's story echoing through the air. But will he come? Someone asked hesitantly. The question hung in the air, a delicate thread of reality. It was one thing to talk about change in the abstract. It was another to confront the ghosts of the past that lingered in their homes and hearts. I'll ask him, the young woman said, her expression fierce with determination. He needs to know that his voice matters, that he is not alone. Casey felt a wave of emotion. It was a reminder of what this gathering could be, a beginning of healing. And yet, the shadows tugged at her heart. What if voices went unheard, lost in the shuffle of courage and fear? The church bell chimed again, a slow, steady reminder of time passing. If they were to move forward, they had to take that first step into uncharted territory, filled with stories aching to be told. As the crowd buzzed with energy, Casey caught Officer Matthews' eye. His intention was clear: this meeting could change everything. Yet an unsettling question struck her. What would happen when they confronted the painful truths? It was only the beginning, but how far were they willing to go to ensure no one was left behind? And what consequences awaited them when they shone a light into so many shadows? Casey stood amidst the growing excitement, but a weight pressed down on her. The bell's chime faded, replaced by a cacophony of thoughts and hopes swirling in her mind. To change the narrative, they needed more than just passion. They needed the courage to confront what lay beneath the surface. Harold's worries lingered, echoing her own doubts. She scanned the crowd. Faces glimmered with shared purpose, yet the haunting specter of unspoken stories lingered. What if bringing those stories to light only deepened the wounds? Just then, Officer Matthews approached, his brow serious yet softened by a hint of promise. "Casey, can we talk?" She nodded, relieved to step away from the buzzing crowd momentarily. "What is on your mind?" "I've been thinking about the stories we might unearth. There are some traumas buried in this town, and some are tied to me." He hesitated, searching her face for understanding. "I think it could help the veterans, especially those who feel forgotten." "Forgotten?" The word hung thick in the air. "What do you mean?" He exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting. "When I first joined the force, I was young, naive. I looked up to a sergeant who had seen things that no person should ever endure. One night, after a long shift, he opened up to me. I was just a rookie at the time, and I didn't know how to respond. Eventually, he stopped talking like he'd just lost hope. The air between them grew heavy. Officer Matthews, that's a profound burden to carry." "Yes, and I never told anyone. Not my colleagues, my family. I didn't want to betray his trust. But I realize now, his silence, too, carries weight. He deserves to be heard. Are you planning to reach out to him? To encourage him to share?" He nodded slowly. "This meeting can be about reckoning. About bringing those stories into light, not just the veterans, but everyone who has been silenced." Casey's heart swelled, a glimmer of hope breaking through the fog of worry. What if we featured stories from the veterans as the heart of our gathering? Exactly. Let us show them they're not alone. We could even set up a private session for conversations beforehand, to provide a safe space. His eyes glistened with intent, igniting Casey's spirit. Around them, the crowd continued to buzz with a contagious energy, but the air felt lighter now. "Let us raise awareness," she said, her resolve intense. "We need to push beyond the comfort zone. This isn't just about collecting stories, it's about healing." "Then we need to get to work," he said, his voice steadying. "Let us rally the veterans and invite anyone else who carries the weight of unspoken tales." As they moved back toward the group, Casey felt a kind of urgency bubbling inside her. They might just muster the strength to peel back the layers of pain, and perhaps even change lives. Suddenly, she spotted the young woman again, still standing at the center of the crowd, her eyes shimmering with hope. "Is your uncle going to join us?" The young woman nodded vigorously. He agreed he just needs some encouragement. "But I believe he'll find the strength to speak." "It starts with one voice," Casey replied, her heart pounding with the possibility. Could this really begin the transformation they all yearned for? Then, a figure emerged from the shadows at the back of the gathering. A broadly built man with familiar features stepped into the light. The crowd quieted. Casey's breath caught in her throat. It was the man she hadn't seen in years, someone she thought she'd never confront again. "Officer Matthews," the man spoke, an edge of familiarity surfacing in his deep voice. "We have some unfinished business, don't we?" Casey's mind raced. What secret had been buried here? What connection sparked this unexpected confrontation? The atmosphere shifted, tension woven between the two men. She realized that the real challenge was just beginning. Was this the moment that would bring the past crashing into the present? The crowd swelled with energy, but a tension hung in the air, an electric current that made Casey's skin prickle. She sensed uncertainty boiling beneath the surface. The older man at the edge of the gathering was watching them, his eyes narrow and unyielding, feeding on the trust that was beginning to form between Marcus and Officer Matthews. "Can you believe this?" Someone whispered from behind Casey, skepticism dripping from their voice. "What is going to change because of one story?" Casey's heart sank. It hurt to hear that doubt from her own community. She turned back to Marcus, whose expression seemed to hang between hope and despair. The crowd buzzed, some eager to hear him speak, others hesitating, caught up in a familiar rhythm of mistrust. "Let us show him," Casey shouted, hoping to drown out the naysayer. "Marcus deserves to be heard. You all deserve to hear the truth." She felt her chest tighten, fearing a misstep. If she lost the crowd now, this could slip through their fingers. The murmurs shifted, whether in agreement or disbelief. Casey couldn't tell. But then, Marcus took a deep breath, the sound cutting through the noise. "You want to hear my story?" His voice, gravelly but firm, made the air still. "Well, let me tell you. It's not just my story. It's ours." He stepped forward, commanded the space with an intensity that caught the crowd off guard. "I fought for this country, but the battle didn't stop when I came home," he continued, his eyes now scanning the faces that once judged him. "I carried both my pride and my scars with me, but each return felt like being hit with a wall of silence. I didn't just lose friends abroad. I felt the friendship of this very community disappear." The tension that had filled the space began to lift. Casey could feel the collective breath of the crowd, a mix of anticipation and reflection. "Service isn't just about fighting," Marcus pressed on. "It's about belonging. I should have been welcomed," a hero celebrated. "But it was as if every time I stepped back here, I was seen as less than existing on the fringes." A murmur of empathy washed over the crowd now, with heads nodding and eyes growing wide. "I never wanted pity," he said gently, his voice softening. "Just understanding. Just a chance to be visible." In that moment, Casey saw some of the skeptics soften, their hardened expressions breaking apart like clay. Something stirred, a flicker of connection that Casey yearned for. "Your stories can change lives," she called out, pumping her fist. "If one person sees strength in Marcus's experience, that's a victory. If we can transform pain into purpose, wasn't it worth it?" The crowd simmered with anticipation, a spark igniting in their hearts. Yet, the older man continued to linger at the edges, his scowl deepening as whispers from the corners amplified. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted. "You think you can just erase the past by letting him speak? You think that's enough to convince us? You're just playing with fire." Fear wrapped around Casey like a vice. The hope they'd built was suddenly threatened by a voice filled with disdain, a reminder of the weight they were all trying to shed. Would they let one man's prejudice drown out the voice of change, or lift it up in defiance? As they glanced back at Marcus, the fire in his eyes remained steady, but Casey could sense his fear of being rejected again. She stepped closer to him, ready to stand her ground. "Are you with us?" she called to the crowd. "Will you listen?" The silence that followed was agonizing, but the collective energy shifted. "Let us change this narrative together," someone yelled, igniting a ripple of agreement. But just as relief washed over Casey, she noticed the old man crouch into the crowd, whispering, his dice rolling behind the scenes. What more secrets lay in wait? Could this moment of unity withstand the shadows lurking just beyond their sight? A hush fell over the crowd as Casey searched for Marcus's eyes. She saw resilience there, but also uncertainty. The older man's dark presence loomed nearby, like a storm ready to break. Yet, she felt the spark they had ignited and hoped it was enough to light up the darkness. "Listen to him," Casey shouted again, willing the crowd to focus. "This is a chance to rewrite our understanding, to break the silence. Why should we trust him?" Another voice called from the back, skepticism piercing through their fragile unity. The weight of the question hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "Because he is one of us," someone chimed in, emboldened by the calls for change. "He fought for us. We owe him that much." The murmur turned louder, voices blending into an anxious chorus. Marcus stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "I can't pretend to know your struggles," he began, "but I've seen enough of this world to understand pain. I've felt it seep into my bones every day since returning." With every word, the crowd began to lean closer, some stepping forward, curiosity seeping through their resistance like light through cracks in a dark wall. Marcus continued, I was angry. I was lost. But I learned something through my journey. I learned that healing begins when we share our stories. Casey felt a shift in the energy, a pulse of something stronger than doubt. It was hope. It had to be. She caught sight of Officer Matthews, standing tall, his demeanor softening as he regarded Marcus. He appeared more open now, less the authoritative figure and more a fellow human feeling the weight of history. "Marcus, is it true?" Matthews asked, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "You were one of those men that risked everything when you came home." "Yes," Marcus replied, voice thickening with emotion. "But when I returned, my community was absent. I just wanted to feel like I mattered." The vulnerability in his words cut through the air, reaching into the heart of anyone listening. The older man, still slinking at the periphery, clenched his fists with fury as the crowd turned toward Marcus. The unease shifted again, making space for compassion, a glimmer of solidarity in a sea of faces. "You're stronger than you think," Casey urged the crowd, sensing a wall beginning to crumble. "Don't let fear hold you back. Let us be a place of kindness, a community that stands together instead of divided by the past." In that moment, a single tear traced a path down Marcus's cheek. "If we can share our wounds," he paused, taking a breath, "then we can start to heal." As the crowd began to respond, nodding and murmuring affirmations, Casey saw a familiar glimmer of acceptance sparking between Matthews and Marcus. The officer took a tentative step forward, then another, breaking the air of separation that had persisted for so long. "Hey, Marcus," Matthews called out, his voice breaking slightly, "thank you for sharing. I've been wrestling with my own doubts, but it's time I stepped up. I want to hear your story, and I want to help." Gasps echoed throughout the crowd. This was more than Casey had hoped for, an alliance forming in innocent trust and mutual understanding. But as smiles began to blossom, she caught sight of the older man, eyes blazing with raw contempt. Something was brewing within him, and she felt that darkness unfurling. Would this moment of connection withstand the potential chaos? As the crowd turned to face the man, bravely questioning what was wrong, Casey's heart raced. Would they choose unity over fear? Would they stand together against the shadows lurking behind them? Because it felt like something was about to break. The older man's voice rang out, harsh and cold. "You think this will change anything? You're just aligning with a loser. This town doesn't want to face the truth. We're fine the way we are." Casey felt the air thicken with tension. The optimism they had fought for was hanging by a thread, threatened by his venomous words. But Marcus stood firm, the dignity of his past intertwining with the strength he'd drawn from rising above it all. "Fine," Marcus echoed, his voice low and steady, carrying gravitas. "Tell me, what does fine look like? Living in fear? Silence. That is not living. That is hiding." The crowd began to shift. Casey felt waves of anger and empathy ricocheting off the townsfolk. She sensed the moment tipping. "Why do you feel the need to lash out?" she challenged, stepping toward the man, her voice rising with passion. "We're here, trying to create compassion. You've lived your life in anger, so why not choose something different instead? Why not listen?" The man hesitated, caught off guard by her unyielding stance. "Listen to what? More lies?" he sneered. "No," Casey shot back. "Listen to the truth. Listen to the stories that have been hidden by prejudice. Heal, move forward. That's what this is about." As she spoke, the crowd rallied behind her, murmurs of agreement rising like a tide. The unity that had begun to bloom felt stronger, pulsating through the air. "Let us not isolate ourselves. Let us be better." Mia's innocent voice chimed in from beside Casey, her small fists clenched in determination. "You can be you, and he can be him. It's okay. Let us all just try." The extraordinary power of a child's truth cut through the chaos, and laughter erupted amongst the townsfolk. The weight of the older man's frown began to surrender slightly, but Casey reminded herself there was still work to be done. "Everyone's suffering holds pain," Marcus interjected, his tone now softer, almost pleading. "Ignoring it doesn't help. It only prolongs the hurt. We've all felt like outsiders in our own world. But we cannot let that pain define us. We have to step forward, together." The crowd's resolve began to solidify, hearts opening to the possibility of change. Casey felt the atmosphere crackling as hope flourished around them. "Change is possible," Officer Matthews added, stepping closer to Marcus. "I want to help carry this weight to our people. I want the younger generation to see that we can learn from our mistakes. The older man crossed his arms, stubbornness flaring in his eyes, but expressions of compassion and understanding began to reflect in others. They were ready. They wanted to break free from the damning cycle of cynicism. Go on, Marcus, Casey encouraged. Share your story. They should hear it, Marcus agreed, resolving to break his silence. I remember day after day battling doubts, demons urging me to retreat. Anger swirled around me as my service went unappreciated, but I came back not only with wounds from the battlefield, but with a heart heavy with longing for acceptance. His story spilled free like a cherished treasure long locked away. The crowd was entranced, eyes glistening, leaning forward and absorbing the history etched into his words. When I returned to Maplewood, it was as if my heart had been tagged as unworthy. But I'm here now because I believe we can rewrite the narrative together. As he spoke, Casey noticed the older man's hardened expression start to soften, the anger slipping just a bit, revealing hints of uncertainty. Perhaps her words and Marcus's story were cutting through the bitterness, offering a glimpse into shared humanity. The crowd erupted in applause, entwined in the fabric of collective healing. A bond, once frayed, began to sew together again, and slowly, voices of support rang out from unexpected corners, urging understanding and unity. The older man narrowed his eyes, but a tremor of doubt danced behind his steely gaze. But what if healing isn't enough? He croaked, still defiant, yet visibly shaken. Then we go deeper, Casey responded resolutely. We create a space to share our history. We build bridges one story at a time. No one is left out. I'll speak, the man finally said, voice wobbly, battling the demons of his own past. But it isn't easy. You want me to show you compassion when I haven't felt any? I'm scared of this. Then it's time to be brave, Casey said softly. You don't have to carry that weight alone. Slowly, the crowd rallied in unity, guiding him closer. They finally understood. Healing takes courage, vulnerability, and listening. They were all in this together. With hands clasped, hearts open, the people of Maplewood had taken an irrevocable step toward change. In a world delicately balancing darkness and light, they had chosen to shine. Let us meet next week, Casey urged, the emotion coursing through her as she looked at the crowd. Let us build on this momentum to let all voices be heard. Everyone nodded, hope buzzing in the air. A community no longer defined by the scars of division, but united in a desire for healing, finally began to rise. As the moon hung high above them a silent witness, they took the first step on a long and winding road to redefine who they were as Maplewood. Together, they had opened a door into a brighter future, a place where vulnerability transformed into strength, and stories once forgotten became the threads of connection. This was just the beginning, but for the first time in a long while, they truly believed they were on a path leading to change. Now the world was theirs to reclaim. And just as there would be laughter, there would also be voices willing to rise against prejudice, and they were never meant to be silenced again. The moment held. Everything felt right. But Casey knew she needed the community's support and encouragement, even action beyond just this day. To learn more about the struggles faced, to engage in true dialogue, and to support this journey of healing that has just begun, what would that require from each of them? They could no longer ignore the weight of each other's stories. Now was the time. So here's the call to action for you. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and feelings about this ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformation. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait, not even one more second to share. Together, we can create a wave of change.